One of the questions that arose from the $200 e-bike video was, what if you cannot find good Ryobi batteries in the recycle bucket? In that case, you're going to have to go through the long process of testing the batteries and replacing the bad cells with known to be good cells. There are 6 basic modes of failure of a tool battery that I have listed on the screen, and if you go through that, you'll find out that if your tool battery isn't working correctly, it's going to into one of those 6 modes of failure.
Let's say you're attempting to build an inexpensive electrical bicycle for $200 or less, and of course you're going to need good lithium-ion batteries. And you went to Home Depot, and as I told you in the video, I found some good ones, but they are few and far between, and more than likely you are not going to find the good ones. So in this project, you're either going to spend time or money. And if you're going to spend money, or if the only tool you have available is a piece of plastic in your wallet, then this is not the channel for you. But if you can't find good Ryobi batteries, and they are hard to find. Ryobi batteries, the reason you get them out of the Home Depot recycle buckets is because they're not that good. Otherwise, people wouldn't be throwing these things away. So you have to go through and you've got to figure out, all right, I've got bad Ryobi batteries. How am I going to turn them into good Ryobi batteries? And that takes time. What you're going to have to do, I have not tested any of these yet, but I'm going to go through on the voltmeter. Hopefully you can see on the voltmeter here, and let's see what we got. Nothing. 0. Nothing. 0. Nothing. 0. Nothing. Oh, 17.7. All right, 17.7. I'm going to stick that in the charger and let's see what happens. Got our 2 styles of Ryobi chargers. It's good to have both styles. Let's stick it in the first one. See what happens. Blinks red, blinks green, blinks red. Now what? Blinks green. Okay, looks like it's going to stay blinking green and start charging. Let's see what it does in the other one. They don't always act the same. Okay, red, blinking green, that is charging. And it continues to go. That doesn't mean that that's a good battery. The longer that that thing blinks green before it turns solid green, the better that battery's going to be. The more amp hours it's going to be. Just because it holds voltage doesn't mean that it's going to be a good battery as far as electric bicycles go, because if it doesn't have the capacity to keep the bicycle running, it's not going to be any good. You can have these batteries and they will run a tool, and for no longer than you normally run a tool, they're just fine. They'll be fine for the life of your tool. But if you want to try to run a electric bicycle off of them, you better have some batteries that have some capacity to them. And then we're going to discuss how to determine that. Now it's 10 minutes later and it's showing a solid green, which means that this battery probably does not have any capacity to it because it charged up too quick. That's what I have discovered after doing a bunch of these.
Now it's time to remove the batteries from the battery shell, and if you go back to the Ryobi 1 Kenobi video, then you will see in detail how I did remove the covers from those batteries. I'm not going to repeat it here.
Now you can just kind of pop that baby right out of there. Now that you've got them out of their cases, don't do like we did before where we clipped them all apart and took them apart. What we're going to try to do now is salvage this thing so we can put in better batteries and put it all back together so we can reuse it. First thing to do is give it a good visual inspection, especially on this battery management system, to see if there looks to be any anything that doesn't look right on there. And then on the batteries, look for things like that. Look for obvious signs of rusting or leaking or something there. So you look those all over really good. That's about all you can do. You're not an electrical engineer or electronic engineer. Otherwise you'd be working for Ryobi and tell them what the heck is wrong with their batteries that they keep failing so often. What you're trying to find is if you see evidence of things like that. Right there, see if that focuses. Any kind of evidence that there's something going on and the connections just aren't any good. Let's look at this one here. There's no sense messing with BMS boards that look like there's something wrong with them. You've got enough of these batteries if you're diligent about going to the recycle buckets that you don't need to mess with BMS boards that have obvious signs that there's something wrong with them. You can go ahead and just for fun check the individual cells, but it doesn't really matter so much. You're going to take the old cells out and you're going to reinstall new cells that you've already worked on. So you've got to have some good batteries on hand before you ever even try this project. 0.67, 0.66, 0.59, 0.55, 0.54. So that really doesn't matter. These are coming out, other batteries are going in. So what you have to do, put on some safety glasses at this point, because things can go flying, and try to pry out. Let's see if I can focus in on that. Probably not. Try to pry these out and get these to be detached from the spot welds while keeping as much of the nickel. Try to keep as much of that as possible because you're going to be resoldering these. And so you need as much of that metal as you can possibly save. So this is the part where it probably takes the most time. And because I'm trying to work around the camera, I'm obviously having my trouble. So I'm going to show you this one before I just go ahead and do it out of camera range here. But there. See how you got all of that one? That was a good one. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to pry those off of there, get those things out with enough of the nickel strip left. These actually usually don't come out that easy. Enough of the nickel strip left that you can solder these. Solder to them, because you're going to take this thing apart and replace these batteries with known to be good batteries. And then you're going to solder them back in once we get the holder, these two plastic pieces. Once we get that apart, then we'll be able to pull these batteries out of there. Now, after just a few minutes of gently prying, you've got the nickel strips off of the batteries, and now you can start taking the batteries apart. The reason that you pry these off before you remove these 4 screws that hold the BMS in place is that it's easier to pry when this thing is still down. The other thing you're going to have to do is get these 2 halves apart and see if you can see that or not. Right there. Right there. There's a little screw that you're going to need a long-winded screwdriver with a tiny little Torx head bit. This is a T8 or maybe a little smaller. But my eyes are gone. Anyway, you're going to have to put that in there. And that's a security screw too. So that's a special little screwdriver you're going to have to order from China to get a hold of that thing. But that's what's holding the two halves, these two white plastic halves that are holding the batteries in. And once you put it back together, you will not have to replace these screws. It just isn't necessary. The 4 screws that hold the BMS in place will also hold this battery in place, and then that fits inside the case. So these aren't really necessary. This must have been something for an intermediate step as they were assembling the thing. But it sure is a pain in the butt, because most of your other small security Torx head bits that you have will not fit into that little groove there. So you're going to have something that can fit long, something with a long shaft to get it in there. And get a hold of that and just unscrew that and get those 2 screws out of there. You don't have to do it in this sequence. You can do it after you take the BMS out. But one way or the other, these 2 screws have to come out of there before the 2 halves of this battery holder will open up far enough for you to get those batteries out of there. And you can screw on that thing, unscrew it all day long, and you can bang on it. But eventually that screw will come out of there. It likes to hide in there, and you have to take the top off in order to get at it. But that's what you're going to have to do, get this thing apart and get these 5 batteries out of there. You don't have to worry too much when you're prying on the battery, because they don't have much voltage. When you put the new ones in, then you got to be careful, because now you got full voltage on these things when you're trying to do that. And when you see a cell like that one right there, that's a bad cell. Don't worry about that thing. It's vented out some of the electrolyte, so you don't want that one. Okay, so once you got those 4 little screws removed, don't remove these 2. You don't need to. And then that's going to allow you to take that out of the way. You're going to see the 5 cells, and then you can see that screw that you're going to have to get out of there by unscrewing that and pulling that. Come on. Pull that out of the way. Then you're going to grab these 2 halves and just pry them apart. Just keep pulling back and forth, just wiggle them back and forth, and this will separate. Okay. And when you do, you got to remember which ones are positives and which ones are negatives. So you see, there's a positive. The easy way to remember. See that right there? That's on the positive side. This other side over here, it doesn't have that, so that is the negative side over there. So when you want to test the batteries, you can just run between those, well, where the terminal would have been. Anyway, so when you take them apart, they're going to be positive to positive, negative to positive, negative to positive, negative to positive. So they're going to make that kind of a snake-like loop through there, and that's how you have to put them back. So make sure you put them back exactly the same way as these things were facing. Positive, negative, positive, negative, positive. Whenever you put them back together. Okay, now it comes time to replace the batteries with known to be good batteries. And you say, well, how do you know they're known to be good? Well, all of these cells were tested on the big board, and if you notice, that has 1.8 amp hours, 1.75 amp hours, 1.75 amp hours, and 1.7 amp hours. And you say, well, that's not very good. Well, that's as good as you're going to get out of a Ryobi battery. And these are Samsung cells, and these are about the best ones. So how do we know these are good? We've tested them. That's the amp hour capacity. They've been sitting around in the hot, the cold for months and months. And they're all around 3.4, 3.38, regardless where you test. So after all of that sitting around, 3.41, 3.42, each one of these cells is still holding around 3.38, 3.42 volts. So these are going to be good batteries. So it's just a question of taking these batteries, putting them back in the cell holders, and soldering them back again. Once you've got all the batteries put back in, you notice positive, negative, positive, negative, positive. The opposite on that for all of these. So you make sure you got them all. See that little spot right there? Positive. Make sure they look like that. You've got that and the first positive going that way on all four of them. Whoops. And like I said, I didn't put the screws to put them back together. Once you screw the BMS back on, you really don't need these screws holding together. You just kind of push them together for right now. So just make sure all your batteries, all your cells are pointing in the right direction when you put these back together. There's no real trick to soldering these things together. Just be sure you put a little solder on each one before you get going. Heat it up good, wipe it off, stick it in the flux. Touch it with a little bit of solder. Hold it down with a screwdriver. Just keep it on there long enough for the solder to hold. And that's about it. Just and just try to do it as quickly as you can. Okay, once you've got it all soldered back together and test it, and it shows 16.91 volts. So we're in good shape to put this thing back together now. So just grab one of your shells, set it in there such that the little FET transistors there in the back slide down in there. If there's any tricky part to this, I suppose it's getting these little beauties lined up. Get them over that little metal tab and underneath, and then slide this thing on it. Squeeze these together. Thermistor. Always something going to cause you problems. That thermistor to me is no good, so I don't care about that. Okay, snap that baby together. Make sure these things go in on the sides there. If you didn't do it right, they're not going to go in. And then just go ahead and put your 5 screws back in the top of this thing. Once I've finished putting it back together, I'll put a little piece of masking tape on the back, the date that I rebuilt it, and what was the amp hours of the batteries that I used. And if you noticed, I put the exact same amp hours in each battery. They may not be the same. This is 1.8, the other ones were 1.75, 1.7, but I made sure that I had all the same amp hour batteries together. Then it's just a question of putting it into the charger. Had about 16.8 volts, and now it's going to charge up to about 20.4 volts. So that's an example of a good battery that's going to be good for an electric bicycle. And now it's just a question of continuing on until you get enough proven batteries that you know you've got enough amp hours to get some power and some distance out of that battery. Once you got your 5 cells, face them all in the right direction, all facing towards the positive. Once you've got your cells out, then it's time to put them into the long tray, like I showed you on the dead and the weak battery cells. Make sure they are heading in the right direction there. Put them in that long tray, and again, that charger costs you around $2.50 or $3 off of eBay, and that's all you need to charge all those batteries. So you put those in that tray just long enough to get them to have enough voltage that you can put them on the big board in the TP4056 charger board. And if you've gotten to this point and you have not watched any of the videos I've posted, it would be good for you to go back and just start at the beginning of the playlist and go through all of them to see where we're at. 1.7, not 0.17, it's 1.7. So that's good. Get these things up to about 2.5 volts. And then you can, ooh, what's that? A bad one. Look at that, 0. If it's inside that charger, and it doesn't get above, just stays at 0. There you go, there's a good example. I had question mark on it. Now there's no question at all. That's a bad cell. Throw that thing out. Anyway, getting rid of the bad cells, well, going through here periodically and checking that voltage will help you, because that one is 0, that'll drag these other ones down, and you don't want that. So if you go through there and you've got one that doesn't match up with the rest of these, get that thing out of there, throw it out, and then the rest of these voltages will start coming up on that. Even, it's like a 1/4 of an amp charger or something. There's not much amps to that at all, but it does work. Let's say you go to the recycle bucket and you get a Ryobi battery and you actually get good voltage. Whether you had to kind of prime it with the using 2 9-volt batteries or whatever method you use, but you got to just take a charge. You got it in this case to go up to 19.8 volts. That doesn't mean it's got any capacity to it. In order to check the capacity, you're going to have to find a load. In this case, this is a 12-volt bulb. Come to Papa. You need a 20-volt bulb, but I didn't have any. What I had was a 12-volt bulb. And that baby's so bright, you'll find out why. I've got that piece of white paper on it. Let me hook that up for a second. I burn out my lens here on my camera. And put this piece of white paper around it. And of course, it's burning so bright because it's twice the voltage it should have on it. Hook up your battery. Hook up your lamp to that with your watt meter. So you hook your battery there up to the terminals. Red on the positive, black on the negative. Hook up your little watt meter. Everybody should have some of these. I mean, this thing just winds up being good for everything. So it's around 19 point something volts. And you patiently wait until that drops to 15 volts. Why 15 volts? Because you've got 5 cells in series. They were 4 volts each, it'd be around 20 volts. And when they're at 3 volts each, 3 times 5 is 15. 15 would be totally discharged. You don't want to go below 3 volts per cell. So you have to sit here and patiently wait now and wait until that drops down to 15 volts. At that point, you can pretty well tell if this is going to be a good battery or not, whether it is going to have the capacity to work well in your electric bicycle or not. There are a lot of Ryobi batteries. They look good. They look like got 20 volts. You put them in the drill motor and they won't even run. So that 12-volt light bulb is pulling 2.7 amps right now. The cells that you get in the Ryobi batteries aren't that great.
Sanyos, the red Sanyos, low capacity, and they're really not that great.
About 1.25 amp hours on average. They get hot. They're just not very good cells. The LGs, 1 to 1.3 amp hours. Not that great. The Samsungs, about 1.75 amp hours. So Samsungs are the best, but you don't find them that often in the Ryobi batteries. But those are your three main types of batteries you're going to get from there. The voltage and the capacity are two entirely different things, and it's fine to have a tool battery that has a good voltage, but if it doesn't have the capacity, it's not going to do you much good. You can get by with it in a tool because you only use it for a few seconds at a time, but under continuous use in an electric bicycle, that's just not going to cut it. 17.1 volts into right now, and just sit here until that gets down to 15 volts, and then I will be able to tell if this battery has good capacity or not, and if it gets hot. That's what you have to do if you're going to use tool batteries that you've got from the recycle bucket to make sure that they're going to be good enough to use in your electric bicycle. Okay, so just about out. I think I caught it just in the nick of time. And you're going to look over here, and we just went underneath 15, but we have to wait until we see the amp hours, 0.992 amp hours. So this has a little less than 1 amp hour for that particular battery. Not great. So that's how you test Ryobi batteries that you get and you bring back to life to find out what the actual capacity is of that. And I'm letting it go down a little bit more than that just to finish this video off. 1.01. We'll just stop right there at 14 volts. You should really think about getting this watt meter. I know I've discussed it in earlier videos. They're fairly cheap and they do quite a bit. So I'm going to put a tag on this one. Say this one is 0.99 amp hours, and it's time to test the next one. All the ones that I replaced the batteries in with anywhere from 1.8 to 1.3 amp hour batteries, you know what the capacity of those are because you've already tested the individual batteries. But when you have a Ryobi battery and you're not sure what the amp hours are of that particular battery before you put it in your electric bicycle, you should go ahead and put it on the watt meter, give it a load, in this case 2 to 2.5 amp load, and just see how well it performs.